Good morning, everyone. I hope everybody is having a great Tuesday. I just wanted to hop on here and talk about grief again, but more importantly, grief in the workplace. So, for those who may be new to my channel and to my video content, my name is Tina Coleman. 35 years ago, I lost my father. My biological father, age 49, suddenly for a massive heart attack. And then 5 years later, my baby sister, age 24 at the time, was in a horrific rental houseboat accident in the Mount Shasta, California area. Her story actually made the national news. And that was extremely difficult. She fought very hard, but eventually, after 19 days, she succumbed to her injuries and we lost her. And then fast forward 8 years later, the worst tragedy yet happened when my 18-year-old daughter was killed instantly in a T-bone car accident. So just a little bit of my background, and then actually rewind back 2 years before I was even born. My mother gave birth to a little boy, the only boy that my mother and father had together. And a month later, he died of SIDS. And then now jumping back to decades later, in addition to all of the losses, my dad, my sister, my daughter, in between all of these, I lost several uncles to murder, as well as an aunt and a cousin in tragic car accidents. And so when all of those things hit you like that, it trickles down. And what oftentimes happens is, especially when you're younger, you kind of don't recognize survivor's remorse. You don't recognize what that grief really might entail long term. And so then going into when my daughter died in 2002, for me, I was very fortunate. I had a great company that provided all the resources that I needed to be able to grieve my daughter's death. My husband was in between jobs and at that time, and he was not able to return to work right away. My daughter's death occurred in the state of Indiana. We did not grow up there. My husband's family, his father did, and we actually relocated to the Indiana area from Oregon, where we had raised our children, or at least our two older children. And so the reason I am talking today about grief in the workplace is that even after all these decades, we still have employees who suffer sudden losses that just turn their world upside down. And so many are not afforded the stability in their workplace from their company to be able to grieve that loss. Many times they're only given two choices: take a few days off and return to work, or resign or be terminated. And that is one of the most difficult positions that any human ever has to be put into. Because when you're given those choices, especially if you're parents and you've got children still in your home and you've lost a child, or anyone suddenly, the trauma from that is so horrific that you're trying to make sense of it all and you're trying to hold it together. And financially, oftentimes families are not in a position to be able to walk away from their jobs. So they're forced to go back to work. And they try to go back to work. They try to function. And oftentimes they may be successful for a short period of time. But then as days and weeks and months and years go by, at least I know for me, I didn't end up going back to work for that company. We chose to relocate back to the Pacific Northwest because that's where all of our family were at. And I won't go into a lot of details on what happened when we decided to go back to Oregon. It was not a smooth transition by any stretch of the means. It was very rough. We ended up living temporarily with family who had begged us to come back and had assured us that we would have a great, wonderful place to come to be able to continue our grief journey. And fortunately, that is not what we ended up walking into. Long story short, we ended up in a very toxic home environment, and we had to get out of there. And that was not a smooth transition. But that journey did lead me to finding my next awesome job. We ended up in the Seattle, Washington area, and I ended up going to work for an amazing family-owned car dealership, and I worked there for several years until we full circled over to the Spokane, Washington area, which we resided in for almost 20 years. And I loved Spokane. But that brings me to my next point, the point of not fully being able to grieve the loss of a child or anyone that you're very close to, that's death really hits you hard, is overlooking your children that may still be living in the home, overlooking what they're going through, because oftentimes they too are trying to grieve the loss of someone. For my children still living at home, the loss of their sister, I didn't realize at the time would later on really impact their adult lives. And so that's been another transition as well. And being a parent, you feel so guilty because you do feel like you had been doing your best to survive, and at the same time hoping and thinking that you had your other children's best interest at heart. Because when you're, at least for me, when I was going through those early days, weeks, months, years after losing our Crystal, in my mind, I thought, well, the fact that I'm still here, the fact that I chose not to give up, not to do myself in, I thought would really have the greatest impact for my children later on. And maybe in some ways it did. Maybe if you ask them now, they might see that. But early following our daughter's death, they were still very young. And then when they hit their teens and into early adolescence, that trauma again manifested itself in other things that I didn't recognize as survivor's guilt. So reckless, just taking risk, trying their best just to survive, which then resulted in drug addiction, suicide, many other facets. So anyway, 23 and a half 23 and a half years past losing our Crystal. it finally has come to the point where God is telling me that I now need to use my experiences to help others navigate losses, especially sudden loss and especially child loss. So that's what I am here doing today with my grief advocacy work, hashtag healing with grief hashtag. Is my hope is that I can continue to be utilized to help others get through those days, weeks, months, moving forward. So my goal is to continue to make content available to any and everyone who needs it and can utilize it. Big shout out to a lot of my donors who already have sent in some great donations to help fund my materials that I'm going to need. I'm actually going to launch some merchandise because I think it's important as well to have those merchandise available so that people know that I exist and that there are others out there that share a lot of the grief and tragedies that you've been through. And so anyway, that's where I'm at for today. If you're watching this video, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. And as always, much love to all of you, and I hope that you're having a great Tuesday. And bye for now.